The divorce papers hit the kitchen counter at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the most important Tuesday of my entire life. My wife of 6 years, Simone Carter Williams, stood there in her silk robe with her arms crossed, her caramel-toned skin glowing in the morning light, her freshly done box braids pulled back into a low bun. Her full lips were pressed into a thin line of satisfaction as she watched me pick up the documents, her dark brown eyes tracking my every move with a coldness I had grown accustomed to over the years. "I want out, Julian," she said, her voice sharp as a blade cutting through the silence of our kitchen. "My lawyer says we can make this quick and clean. You keep your little computer thing, I keep the house and half of whatever's in our accounts. Sign by Friday, and we can both move on with our lives." I looked at her. This woman I had loved for 8 years, married for 6, sacrificed for constantly, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not heartbreak, not anymore. That had happened gradually over years of dismissal, years of being made to feel small, years of watching her choose her family's approval over my dreams. What I felt now was just a quiet, settled calm. The calm of a man who had been preparing for this moment longer than she could possibly know. What Simone didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known because she had stopped paying attention to anything I did years ago, was that in exactly 17 hours and 12 minutes, my little computer thing would ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Novatech Solutions, the company I had built from my laptop in our spare bedroom while she complained about the light keeping her awake, the company she had mocked at family dinners and dismissed in conversations with her friends, was about to go public at a valuation of $2.3 billion. My 34% stake meant that by tomorrow morning I would be worth approximately $782 million on paper, and she had just filed for divorce 27 hours too early. I set the papers down calmly on the granite countertop, the same countertop I had paid for with money from my Series B funding, the same countertop where Simone had stood countless times telling me that I needed to get realistic about my career prospects. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, for the first time in months. "I'll have my lawyer review these," I said quietly, keeping my voice measured and even. She rolled her eyes dramatically, her dark brown irises catching the morning light streaming through the windows. "What lawyer, Julian? We both know you can't afford one. Your little startup hasn't turned a profit in 3 years? Just sign the papers and stop embarrassing yourself. Stop embarrassing both of us." The irony of her words was almost too perfect. Novatech had been profitable for 18 months. We had posted $127 million in revenue last quarter alone. But Simone didn't know that because Simone had never asked. She had made up her mind about me years ago, and nothing I did would ever change her opinion. I said nothing. I simply picked up my keys from the hook by the door, grabbed my laptop bag, and walked out into the morning air. Behind me, I heard her call out something dismissive, something about not running away from my responsibilities. But I didn't turn around. I had somewhere more important to be. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Are you in Atlanta, Houston, London, or maybe Lagos? I love seeing our global community. Now let's get back to Julian and see how this unfolds. My name is Julian Marcus Williams. I'm 36 years old, a black man with deep brown skin that my grandmother always said came straight from her Nigerian roots. I keep my hair in a low fade, my beard trimmed close and neat, and my expectations of people even closer to my chest. I grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, in a 2-bedroom apartment that my parents somehow made feel like a palace, through sheer force of love and determination. My father, Theodore Williams, was a postal worker who walked his route rain or shine for 37 years. My mother, Dorothy Williams, worked as a home health aide, caring for other people's elderly parents while raising her own son with fierce devotion. Neither of them graduated college. Neither of them had connections or wealth or any of the advantages that Simone's family took for granted. But they had something more valuable. They believed in me unconditionally. They scraped and saved and sacrificed so I could have opportunities they never had. When I showed an aptitude for computers as a kid, they found a way to buy me a used laptop. When I got accepted to coding camps, they drove me 3 states away and slept in the car to save money on hotels. When I received my acceptance letter to MIT, full scholarship, my mother cried for an hour straight. I met Simone Denise Carter during my junior year at MIT. She was a senior at Boston University, visiting a friend on our campus for the weekend. I spotted her across the student center. Beautiful didn't even begin to cover it. Her skin was the color of warm honey, smooth and flawless. She wore her hair differently then, natural curls that framed her face like a crown. She had a smile that made me forget my own name, made me forget the code I was supposed to be debugging, made me forget everything except the overwhelming need to know who she was. I walked up to her with a confidence I didn't know I possessed and introduced myself. She laughed at my obvious nervousness, but it was a kind laugh, a warm laugh. We talked for 3 hours that night. By the end of the week, she was my girlfriend. By the end of the year, I knew I was going to marry her. But first, I had to meet her family. The Carter family lived in Newton, Massachusetts, in a house that seemed designed to make people like me feel small. 5 bedrooms, 3-car garage, a lawn so perfectly manicured it looked artificial. Simone's father, Dr. Vernon Carter, was a successful orthodontist with 3 practices across the state. Her mother, Patricia Carter, had never worked a day in her life, but spoke about household management like it was a Fortune 500 position. From the moment I stepped through their front door, I understood my place in their eyes. Dr. Vernon Carter met us in the foyer, his handshake firm but brief, his eyes assessing me like I was a patient presenting with disappointing symptoms. He led us into a living room that felt more like a museum than a home. Everything positioned just so. Nothing out of place. Not a single sign that actual people lived there and made messes and laughed and loved. "So, Julian," Dr. Carter said, settling into his leather armchair like a king taking his throne. "Simone tells us you're at MIT. Impressive school. What are you studying?" "Computer science and business, sir. Double major." "Computer science." He said the words slowly, tasting them. "That's quite popular these days, isn't it? Every young man seems to think he's going to be the next Bill Gates." "I'm not trying to be the next anyone, sir. I'm just trying to build something useful." He chuckled, but it wasn't a warm sound. "Ambition. That's good. But ambition without resources is just dreaming. Tell me, what do your parents do?" And there it was, the question that would define how they saw me forever. My father is a postal worker, 30 years with the USPS. My mother is a home health aide. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia Carter's expression didn't change. It was already fixed in that particular kind of polite dismissal. But I saw something shift behind her eyes. Something that said, I knew it. I knew he wasn't good enough. "I see," Dr. Carter said finally. "Well, there's nothing wrong with honest work. Salt of the earth, those kinds of jobs." Salt of the earth was how people talked about those they considered beneath them while pretending to show respect. I filed the phrase away, adding it to the growing list of subtle insults I would catalog over the years. "My parents are the hardest working people I know," I said, keeping my voice level. "Everything I've accomplished is because of them." Of course. He waved a dismissive hand. "Family is important. That's something we believe in strongly, isn't it, Patricia?" Patricia nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. "Very strongly. We've given Simone every advantage, the best schools, the best opportunities. We just want to make sure she ends up with someone who can continue that standard of living. The implication was clear. Someone who can continue that standard of living, and you're not that someone. From the moment I stepped through their front door, I understood my place in their eyes. Patricia Carter was 61 years old, a striking black woman with rich dark skin and silver-streaked locks that were always styled to perfection. She wore designer clothes like armor and wielded passive-aggressive comments like weapons. The first time she saw me, she looked me up and down like she was appraising livestock at an auction. "So," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you're the scholarship student Simone's been telling us about." Not the young man. Not Julian. The scholarship student. She had reduced my entire identity to my financial aid status in a single sentence. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, keeping my voice respectful even as I burned inside. Full ride to MIT Computer Science and Business double major. How ambitious. She made the word sound like a disease. Dr. Vernon Carter was slightly more subtle in his disapproval. The 63-year-old black man had graying temples and the distinguished bearing of someone who had earned every penny he owned through decades of hard work. I respected his accomplishments, even as I recognized that he would never respect mine. He would look at me over his glasses during family dinners and ask questions that were designed to expose my inadequacy. "So, what's your 5-year plan, son? Have you thought about something more stable than tech? Something with guaranteed income? What exactly does your father do again? A postal worker?" The way he said it, you'd think my father delivered diseases instead of mail. The Carters tolerated me through our dating years. They tolerated me through our engagement, though Patricia cried at the announcement dinner, and not from joy. They tolerated me through our wedding, a lavish affair that Simone's parents paid for and never let me forget. Patricia made a toast that night that mentioned my potential 4 times, as if she needed to remind everyone that I hadn't actually accomplished anything yet. But they never accepted me. And over time, their disapproval seeped into my marriage like poison into a wound. For the first 3 years of our marriage, things were good, or at least I convinced myself they were good. I worked at a mid-level tech company, bringing home a respectable salary of $95,000 a year. Simone worked as a marketing coordinator at a boutique agency, though she quit after year 2 because she found it unfulfilling and wanted to explore her options. I supported her decision without complaint. I supported every decision she made without complaint. I was so desperate to prove myself worthy of her that I forgot to ask whether she was worthy of me. The Carter family gatherings became exercises in endurance. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday and anniversary, I sat at their table and absorbed their judgment like a sponge absorbs water. I remember one Christmas dinner, the 3rd year of our marriage, when Derek decided to helpfully suggest that I should consider dental school. "There's always room for another orthodontist in the family," he said, flashing the same smile his father used when he was being condescending. Derek was 32 years old, a black man with his father's dark complexion and his mother's arrogance, holding an MBA from Boston University that he had parlayed into a middle management position at a pharmaceutical company. He considered himself successful. He considered me a project. "I'm not really interested in dentistry," I said carefully. "Of course not. You're interested in computers." He said the word like it was a disease. "But Julian, let's be realistic. The tech industry is brutal. For every success story, there are 1,000 failures. Wouldn't it be smarter to have a backup plan? Something stable?" "Derek," Simone murmured. "Leave him alone." "I'm just trying to help." Derek spread his hands in false innocence. "Someone has to look out for my sister's future, since her husband seems determined to chase dreams instead of dollars." Patricia nodded approvingly. "Derek makes a good point, dear. There's no shame in having a safety net. Your father had a backup plan when he started his first practice. It's just good sense." I looked around the table, at Patricia's smug expression, at Vernon's patronizing nod, at Derek's self-satisfied smile, at Simone's downcast eyes, and I made a decision. I would not argue. I would not defend myself. I would simply work harder, build smarter, and let my success speak for itself. "I'll think about it," I said, and went back to eating my overcooked turkey. But I didn't think about dental school. Instead, I went home that night and worked until 4 a.m., refining the code that would become the backbone of Novatech's platform. Every insult became fuel. Every dismissal became motivation. Every time Patricia Carter looked at me like I was something her daughter would outgrow, I added another feature, fixed another bug, moved one step closer to the moment when they would all have to eat their words. Then I got the idea for Novatech. It started, as most good ideas do, with a problem I couldn't stop thinking about. In my day job, I worked with small businesses all the time, and I kept seeing the same issue over and over. Inventory management systems that were either too expensive for small companies to afford or too complicated for non-technical people to use. Enterprise software that cost $50,000 a year wasn't accessible to the corner store or the family restaurant or the small boutique trying to compete with Amazon. What if, I thought, there was a better way? What if I could build something powerful enough to solve the problem, but simple enough for anyone to use? What if I could democratize the tools that big businesses use to dominate and put them in the hands of the little guys? I built the first version of the Novatech platform in 6 months, working nights and weekends while holding down my day job. I would come home from the office at 6 p.m., have dinner with Simone, and then retreat to our spare bedroom to code until 2 or 3 in the morning. I was running on fumes and determination, fueled by a vision I couldn't shake. "You're always on that computer," Simone would complain, standing in the doorway of the spare room with her arms crossed. "When's the last time you took me somewhere nice? When's the last time we did anything together?" "Soon, baby," I'd promise, not looking up from my screen. "This is going to change everything for us. Just give me a little more time." "That's what you said 3 months ago." "I know. I'm sorry. Just trust me on this. Please." She didn't trust me. She didn't believe me. And looking back, I can't blame her entirely. I was a man with a dream and a laptop, making promises I had no guarantee of keeping. But the difference between us was that I believed in my own potential, even when no one else did. When I quit my job to focus on Novatech full-time, everything changed. I had saved up enough money to cover our expenses for 6 months. I had secured $50,000 in seed funding from an angel investor who saw the demo I had built and immediately understood its potential. I had meetings scheduled with 3 venture capital firms, all of whom had expressed strong interest in hearing more. From my perspective, I was taking a calculated risk with a reasonable chance of success. From Simone's perspective, and more importantly, from her family's perspective, I had lost my mind. Patricia Carter called a family meeting at their home in Newton 3 days after I quit my job. I drove out there with Simone, who spent the entire car ride explaining that her mother just wanted to understand and that I should try not to get defensive. The meeting was an ambush. I sat in their formal living room, surrounded by artwork that cost more than my parents' apartment, while Patricia Carter paced in front of me like a prosecutor presenting her closing argument. "You quit your job," she said, her dark eyes blazing with righteous fury. "A perfectly good job with benefits and stability and a future, to play around on your computer like a teenager." "It's not playing around, Mrs. Carter. I have investors interested. I have a solid business plan." "Interested isn't money, Julian." She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Interested is nothing. Do you know how many young men have interested investors and solid business plans and end up with nothing but debt and broken dreams?" "Patricia, Doctor," Carter said from his leather armchair, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of warning. "Let the boy speak." "Thank you, sir." I took a breath, trying to keep my composure. I understand this looks risky from the outside, but I've done my research. The market for small business software is growing at 15% annually. My platform addresses a specific pain point that existing solutions don't solve efficiently. I have beta users who are already seeing real results. Beta users, Patricia interrupted with a dismissive laugh. Do beta users pay your mortgage? Do beta users put food on my daughter's table? I have 6 months of expenses saved, I continued, refusing to be derailed. And the meetings with VC firms are very promising. If even one of them comes through, we're looking at enough capital to… If… Patricia's voice dripped with contempt. If one of them comes through. And if they don't? What then? You crawl back to some company with your tail between your legs, begging for your old job back while my daughter suffers for your arrogance. I would never let Simone suffer. You're already making her suffer. Patricia's voice rose to a near shout. Do you think this is easy for her? Watching her husband throw away his career on a fantasy? Explaining to her friends why her husband doesn't have a real job anymore? I looked at Simone, hoping, praying, for some kind of support. She sat next to her mother on the expensive sofa, her eyes fixed on the floor, her fingers twisted together in her lap. She said nothing. Dr. Carter cleared his throat. Son, I've seen a lot of young men with ideas over the years. Patients who are going to start businesses, invest in real estate, become the next big thing. Ideas are cheap. Execution is expensive. Do you honestly have the resources to execute this plan of yours? I thought about the $50,000 in seed funding, the meetings scheduled for next week, the beta users who were already sending me testimonials, the 100-page business plan I had spent months refining. But I knew that nothing I said would matter to these people. They had already decided who I was. They had decided the day they met me, and nothing I accomplished would ever change their minds. I have a plan, sir, I said simply, and I believe in it. Patricia turned to her daughter with an expression of exaggerated despair. Simone, honey, this is exactly what I warned you about before you married him. Men like Julian have dreams, but dreams don't pay mortgages. Dreams don't provide the kind of life you deserve. Your father was smart and came from a good family. He understood that ambition has to be matched with practicality. Mom, please, Simone murmured, but she didn't disagree. She didn't defend me. She just sat there, letting her mother tear me apart, and I realized with a sickening clarity that she agreed with every word. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of building. 3 years of sleepless nights and impossible deadlines and moments of doubt so profound I thought they might swallow me whole. 3 years of watching Simone's interest in my work dwindle from skepticism to indifference to outright contempt. But also 3 years of victory. What the Carter family didn't know, what Simone had stopped caring enough to learn, was that my little computer thing had grown beyond anything they could imagine. The $50,000 seed funding turned into $2 million in Series A funding from one of the top VC firms in Silicon Valley. They saw what I saw, a platform that could revolutionize how small businesses operated, that could save them thousands of hours and millions of dollars, that could compete with enterprise solutions at a fraction of the cost. The $2 million turned into $18 million in Series B funding 2 years later, when our user base hit 10,000 paying customers and our revenue crossed $20 million annually. We moved out of my spare bedroom and into a real office. I hired my first employees, hungry, talented people who believed in the vision as much as I did. The $18 million turned into $75 million in Series C funding last year, when Novatech exploded. We had over 400 employees now, offices in San Francisco and New York, and contracts with companies whose names would make the Carters choke on their expensive wine. And tomorrow, we were going public. I had kept it quiet. Not secret, exactly. The tech press covered us regularly. The business journals wrote articles about our growth. Industry analysts called us one of the most promising enterprise software companies of the decade. But Simone had stopped reading anything I sent her years ago. Her parents certainly didn't follow tech news, and I had learned, through painful experience, to stop sharing my victories with people who only wanted to see me fail. My phone buzzed as I sat in my car outside the house I had paid for, the house Simone thought she was entitled to in the divorce. It was my CFO, Denise Washington, calling from New York. Denise was a 44-year-old black woman with smooth ebony skin and natural hair she wore in a sophisticated twist-out that somehow managed to look both professional and beautiful. She had been with me since Series A, one of the first believers, someone who had left a comfortable position at a consulting firm because she saw the potential in what I was building. She was also one of my closest friends and the person I trusted most with the financial future of our company. "Julian, everything's confirmed for tomorrow," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "Opening bell at 9:30 a.m. Your speech is locked and loaded. We're looking at a $47 opening price, maybe higher based on the pre-market interest we're seeing. The bankers are very optimistic." "Thanks, Denise." I paused, watching Simone move past the window of our kitchen, probably already on the phone with her mother celebrating her imminent freedom. "I need you to connect me with Reginald after this call." "Reginald?" Her voice sharpened with concern. "The lawyer? Julian, is everything okay?" I looked back at the house one more time. The house I had renovated. The house I had filled with furniture Simone picked out, and I paid for. The house where I had spent countless nights alone while she went to girls' dinners that seemed to happen 3 times a week. "My wife just filed for divorce," I said. Silence on the line for a long moment. Then, "Julian, the timing. I know. That's exactly why I need Reginald. If you're already seeing where this is going, hit that like button right now and comment below. What do you think Julian should do? Should he tell Simone the truth or let her find out on her own? Let me know your prediction." Now, what happens next changes everything. Reginald Foster was not just any lawyer. The 52-year-old black man with a shaved head that gleamed under any light source and a presence that commanded every room he entered was one of the top matrimonial attorneys in New York State. His client list read like a who's who of finance, entertainment, and old money. He specialized in high-net-worth divorces, the kind where both parties had armies of attorneys and assets spread across continents, the kind where a single decimal point could mean the difference of millions of dollars. But Reginald was also a friend. We had been classmates at MIT, he in mechanical engineering before pivoting to law school, and we had stayed close over the years. He had been one of my earliest investors in Novatech, not because he needed the money, but because he believed in me. And when I had mentioned casually, about a year ago, that my marriage wasn't going well, he had quietly said, "If you ever need my services professionally, I'm here." I had hoped I wouldn't need to take him up on that offer. But hope, as they say, is not a strategy. When I called Reginald, he answered on the first ring. I could hear papers shuffling in the background. He was already at work, already prepared. "I saw the filing come through my alerts," he said, his deep voice as steady as a rock in a storm. "She filed in New York State, standard no-fault grounds, requesting equitable distribution of marital assets. Her lawyer is Linda Chen from Morrison and Partners. Competent, but not exceptional. No match for what I'm going to bring." "What does this mean for tomorrow, Reg?" "It means your wife has extraordinarily bad timing, my friend." I could hear him smiling through the phone. "Julian, let me explain how this works under New York law. When you file for divorce, you're essentially setting a date for when the marital assets will be valued. Everything acquired during the marriage is subject to division, but the question is, what is it worth? And that value is typically assessed at the time of filing, or at a date close to it. She filed today. Your company's public valuation doesn't exist until tomorrow." I let that sink in, the full weight of the legal situation becoming clear. So she's entitled to whatever Novatech was worth as a private company. Your last 409A valuation was what? 6 months ago. $340 million for the whole company. My stake was valued at approximately $115 million. So her equitable share of that stake, assuming a 50-50 split, which is standard, would be around $57 million. That's what we're working with, not $391 million, which is what half of your stake would be worth at tomorrow's projected valuation. The difference was staggering. By filing for divorce one day too early, Simone had cost herself over $330 million. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated after years of being told I would never amount to anything. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of the games. Tired of the disrespect. Tired of being married to someone who had never bothered to know me. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Nothing tonight. Go to New York. Ring your bell. Make your money. I'll handle the response to her filing, and I'll make sure she understands exactly what she walked away from. By the time I'm done, she'll know that her perfectly timed divorce was actually perfectly terrible timing. Reginald, I don't want to be cruel about this. I just want out. I know, brother, and you'll get out. Clean and fair, exactly as the law provides. It's not cruelty to follow the law, Julian. It's just consequences." I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to my parents' apartment in Bed-Stuy. The neighborhood had changed a lot since I was a kid. Gentrified, they called it, though my parents still paid the same rent-stabilized rate they had for 30 years. But the buildings still looked the same slightly crooked steps, the same buzzer that only worked half the time, the same feeling of home that washed over me the moment I walked through the door. My mother was waiting for me in the kitchen, which meant she had somehow known I was coming. She always knew. Dorothy Williams, 62 years old, her warm mahogany complexion glowing under the kitchen light, her natural silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. She took one look at my face and opened her arms. "Come here, baby," she said. I hugged her like I was 10 years old again, hiding from bullies who said I was too skinny, too nerdy, too different. She held me the same way she had then, like I was the most precious thing in the world. "Simone filed for divorce," I said into her shoulder. "I know, baby." "How do you know?" "Because I've been watching that woman look through you for years, and I knew it was only a matter of time." She pulled back, her brown eyes meeting mine with fierce love. "You're too good for her, Julian. You always were." "Mom. Don't you mom me. That girl and her family treated you like dirt from day one, and you kept trying to prove yourself to people who were never going to see your worth. Tomorrow the whole world is going to see what you've built, and she won't be there to share it, because she threw you away like you were nothing." My father appeared in the doorway. Theodore Williams, 64 years old, his deep brown skin weathered by decades of Brooklyn sun and Brooklyn winters, his closely cropped gray hair a testament to a life of honest work. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. "Son," he said finally, "I'm proud of you. Not because of the company or the money or any of that. I'm proud because you never gave up on yourself, even when everyone around you gave up on you. That's more important than any stock price." I stayed at my parents' apartment that night, sleeping in my old childhood bedroom, surrounded by the trophies and certificates of a younger Julian who had no idea what the future held. In the morning, I woke to the smell of my mother's cooking. Eggs, bacon, grits, biscuits, the full spread she made for special occasions. "Big day," she said, setting a plate in front of me. "You need your strength." After breakfast, I put on my best suit, a custom Tom Ford that I had ordered 3 months ago specifically for this moment. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, with a subtle pattern that caught the light. I looked at myself in the small bathroom mirror and saw someone I barely recognized, confident, successful, about to ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. My parents drove with me to Manhattan. The company had offered to send a car, but I wanted to share this moment with the people who had made it possible. We arrived at the NYSE building at 8:45 a.m., and I could already see my team gathering outside. Denise in her sharp gray suit. Marcus Chen, our CTO, looking nervous and excited. Lisa Okonkwo, our COO, radiating calm confidence. Lisa was a 39-year-old black woman with rich dark skin and locks that fell past her shoulders, brilliant and strategic. Someone who had left a VP position at Google to join our team when we were still operating out of my spare bedroom. She had taken a 60% pay cut to join Novatech, betting on my vision when it was nothing but a prototype and a PowerPoint deck. "You ready?" she asked, her brown eyes meeting mine. "I've been ready for years." At 9:15 a.m., I stood on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, looking down at the trading floor. The energy was electric. Traders in their colorful jackets, screens flashing with numbers, the barely controlled chaos that somehow translated into the world's most powerful financial market. Behind me, my parents held hands, my mother wiping tears from her eyes. Beside me, my team stood ready. At 9:30 a.m. exactly, I rang the opening bell. The sound echoed across the trading floor, across the city, across my entire life. Around me, people cheered. My team, the NYSE staff, the traders below who had positioned themselves for our opening. On the screens, I watched Novatech's ticker symbol, NVTK, begin to trade. The opening price, $52 per share, $5 higher than our projected opening. By 10 a.m., the stock had risen to $58. By noon, it hit $63. By the time the market closed at 4 p.m., Novatech Solutions had finished its first day of trading at $67.42 per share, with a total market capitalization of $2.8 billion. My 34% stake was worth $952 million. I was, by any definition, rich beyond my wildest dreams. And my wife had filed for divorce 27 hours too early. The story broke on every financial news outlet by lunchtime. CNBC ran a segment on the stunning Novatech IPO. Bloomberg featured an interview where I talked about democratizing enterprise software. Tech Twitter exploded with congratulations, analysis, and hot takes. My phone, which I had turned back on after the bell, was flooded with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old classmates, distant relatives, former colleagues who had never believed in my vision and now wanted to reconnect. And then, at 4:47 p.m., a text from Simone. "I just saw the news. We need to talk." I didn't respond. At 5:15 p.m., another text. "Julian, why didn't you tell me? Call me back. This is important." I didn't respond. At 6:30 p.m., a voicemail, her voice cracking. "Julian, this is insane. Almost $1 billion? And you didn't say anything? We need to talk about the divorce papers. I think I made a mistake. Please call me. Please." I was at a celebration dinner with my parents and my executive team when the calls started coming in earnest. I watched my phone light up on the table, over and over, with Simone's name. I let it ring every time. "We're about to reach the moment you've been waiting for. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to see karma in action." Because what Julian does next. Simone never saw it coming. My mother noticed my phone buzzing. "Everything okay, baby?" "Simone," I said simply. She saw the news. The table went quiet. Then Lisa started laughing. Not cruel, just incredulous at the cosmic justice of the situation. "Let me get this straight," Lisa said, leaning back in her chair. "She filed for divorce yesterday. The day before you became one of the wealthiest people in New York. The day before the whole world found out what you built." "The day before," I confirmed. Julian. Lisa shook her head, her locks swaying with the movement. I've known you for 4 years. I've watched you work 18-hour days, take calls at midnight, sacrifice everything for this company. And your wife filed for divorce because she thought you were a failure. She didn't know, I said quietly. She didn't want to know, Denise corrected. There's a difference. The information was there. The press covered us. The funding rounds were public. Anyone who cared enough to pay attention knew that Novatech was succeeding. She chose not to care. Marcus Chen, our CTO, spoke up for the first time. The 40-year-old man with kind eyes behind designer frames had been with me almost from the beginning, leaving a comfortable position at Microsoft to join what was then just 2 guys in a spare bedroom with a dream. Julian, I watched you turn down dinner invitations, skip vacations, work through holidays, all for this company. And every time I asked how Simone was handling it, you'd get this look in your eyes, like you were carrying something heavy. I admitted. I was carrying the weight of trying to succeed, while the person who was supposed to support me was hoping I'd fail. That's not support, Lisa said firmly. That's sabotage. Passive sabotage, maybe, but sabotage nonetheless. I thought about all the times Simone had subtly undermined my confidence. The times she'd compare me to friends' husbands who had real jobs. The times she'd sigh dramatically when I said I had to work late. The times she'd mention, casually, that her mother was worried about our financial stability. There was one night, about 18 months ago, that I had never told anyone about. I had just closed our Series C funding, $75 million, the largest round in the company's history, and I came home floating on air. This was the moment everything changed. This was the proof that Novatech was real, that my vision was validated, that the years of sacrifice were finally paying off. Simone was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey," I said, unable to keep the excitement out of my voice. "I have incredible news. We closed Series C today. $75 million. She glanced up briefly. "That's nice. That's nice." I stared at her. "Simone, this is everything. This means we can scale the company, hire more people, maybe even start talking about going public in a couple years. This is life-changing money." "I heard you." She went back to her phone. "But it's not like we're going to see any of that money, right? It goes into the company. You're still going to be working all hours, still going to be building something incredible." She made air quotes without looking up. "And I'm still going to be sitting here alone, wondering if my husband remembers he's married." The joy drained out of me like water from a tub. "I'm building this for us, Simone. For our future. For our family." "What family?" She finally looked up, and there was a coldness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "We don't have kids. We barely have a marriage. All we have is you and your computer and your dreams that never seem to include me." I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell her that everything I was doing was for us, that I was trying to build something that would give us freedom, security, choices. But I looked at her face, and I realized something devastating. She didn't want to hear it. She had already made up her mind about who I was and what I would become, and no amount of success would change that. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said quietly, and went to my office to work. That was the night I stopped sharing victories with my wife. My father set down his fork. "That woman never appreciated you, son. None of them did. Her whole family treated you like you weren't good enough to breathe the same air as them, and you just kept working, kept building, kept proving your worth to people who were never going to see it." "They thought I'd fail," I said. "They were so certain I'd fail that they didn't even bother to check if I was succeeding. They just assumed." "And now they know," my mother said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Now everyone knows." That night, after the dinner, After the champagne toasts and the congratulations and the dozens of photos that would appear in business publications for months, I returned to the Four Seasons Hotel in Manhattan. My company had booked me the penthouse suite, $15,000 a night, a number that still seemed absurd, even though I could now afford it thousands of times over. Simone was waiting in the lobby. She looked different than she had yesterday morning, disheveled, desperate, her box braids escaping from their neat bun, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She was still beautiful, still the woman I had fallen in love with 8 years ago, but I saw her clearly now. I saw the calculation in her desperation. I saw the regret that came not from losing me, but from losing what I was worth. "Julian," she said, rising from the lobby couch as I approached. "We need to talk, please. I think we've said everything we need to say. Please." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I felt something. Not love, not anymore, but perhaps the ghost of what love used to be. I didn't know. If I had known about the IPO, about what the company was worth. "If you had known what?" I cut her off, keeping my voice calm and even. "That I was worth something? Simone, you knew exactly what I was building. You watched me build it for 3 years. You just didn't believe it would ever amount to anything. You thought I was wasting my time, just like your mother said, just like your father implied at every family dinner, just like everyone in your family believed from the moment they met me. That's not fair, isn't it?" I tilted my head, studying her face. "When's the last time you asked about my company? When's the last time you came to an office event, or read one of the articles written about us, or even pretended to take an interest in what I was doing?" She didn't answer. She couldn't answer, because she knew the truth as well as I did. "I spent 6 years being told I wasn't enough," I continued. "By you, by your mother, by your father, by your brother and your aunts and your cousins, and everyone in your family who looked at me and saw a scholarship kid from Brooklyn who didn't deserve their precious Simone. I worked 18-hour days building something incredible, and you complained that I wasn't paying enough attention to you. I sacrificed sleep, health, friendships, everything. And you filed for divorce because you thought you could do better." "I made a mistake," she whispered, tears streaming down her caramel cheeks. "I know that now. I was listening to my mother. She got in my head. She said I deserved better." "Your mother was right about one thing," I said. "You do deserve the life you want, but so do I, and the life I want doesn't include being married to someone who only sees my worth when it's printed in a headline. Julian, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can—" "Reginald Foster is my attorney," I said, watching her face carefully. "He'll be in touch with your lawyer tomorrow to discuss the terms of our divorce." The color drained from her face. "Reginald Foster, the divorce attorney. Julian, you don't need someone like that. We can be civil about this. We can figure out something fair for both of us." "We will be civil," I agreed. "And we will be fair. The law is very clear about how marital assets are valued in a divorce. Your filing establishes the date of valuation. You filed yesterday. Novatech went public today." I watched the realization dawn on her face. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion, the foundation crumbling, the walls caving in, the whole structure coming down piece by piece. "No," she breathed. "No, that's not. That can't be how it works. The company is still your company. The shares are still your shares. The timing can't possibly—" "I'm afraid it can, and it does. My lawyers will be very thorough about documenting the timeline." "Julian, please." She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve. "Please, we can withdraw the filing. We can pretend this never happened. I was upset. I wasn't thinking clearly. My mother had been in my ear for months." "You were thinking very clearly, Simone." I gently removed her hand from my arm. "You thought you were leaving a man with nothing. You thought you were securing your future by getting out while you still could. You thought you were finally taking your mother's advice and cutting your losses before I dragged you down any further. You just didn't bother to check what I was actually worth. I love you, she said desperately. I've always loved you. No, you didn't. The words came out gentle, almost sad. You loved the idea of me when we met, the MIT graduate, the ambitious young man who might become something someday. Then you loved what you thought you could make me, someone smaller, more manageable, someone who would give up his dreams and get a regular job to meet your family's approval. But you never loved me, Simone. Not the real me. Not the man who stayed up until 3 a.m. coding because he believed in something bigger than himself. Not the man who kept going when everyone said he would fail. That man was invisible to you. She was crying openly now, tears ruining her makeup, her whole body shaking with sobs. What about the house? Our savings accounts? What am I supposed to do? You'll receive your equitable share of our marital assets, calculated based on their value at the time of your filing. That's what the law provides, and I won't try to cheat you out of a single dollar. It just won't be the share you were expecting. This isn't fair, she whispered. No, I agreed, but neither were the last 6 years. I walked past her toward the elevator. I could hear her calling my name, begging me to stop, to listen, to reconsider. But I didn't turn around. I had spent years turning around for Simone, years putting her needs above mine, years sacrificing my dignity on the altar of a marriage that had been dying long before she filed those papers. No more. The next morning, I woke to 23 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and one number I knew all too well, the Carter family home in Newton. I checked my voicemail and found a greatest hits collection of panic disguised as reconciliation. Patricia Carter's message came first, her voice dripping with a sweetness I had never heard in 15 years of knowing her. Julian, sweetheart, it's your mother-in-law. We saw the wonderful news about your company on the television this morning. A billion-dollar company. I always knew you had it in you, dear. I always told Simone that you were going places. Please call us back so we can celebrate together as a family. And don't worry about that silly divorce business. Simone was just going through a rough patch. You know how dramatic she can be. I'm sure you two can work everything out. I deleted it. Doctor. Vernon Carter's message was more restrained, but equally transparent. Julian, it's Vernon. Congratulations on the IPO. That's quite an achievement for a young man from your background. I think we should sit down and discuss the future. Yours, Simone's, the family's. There may have been some misunderstandings over the years that we should clear up. Call me when you get a chance. I deleted it. Derek Carter, Simone's 32-year-old brother, left a message that was almost laughable in its sudden warmth. Hey, Julian. It's Derek. Man, I always knew you were onto something big with that tech thing. Remember when I said you should stick with it? I was always in your corner, bro. Anyway, let's grab drinks sometime. I've got some investment opportunities I'd love to discuss with you. Family discount, you know? I deleted it, and then blocked his number for good measure. The Carter family spent the next 2 weeks launching a full-scale campaign to rehabilitate their image in my eyes. They sent flowers to my office, 5 dozen roses with a card that said, "From your family at Carter Orthodontics." They sent gift baskets to my parents' apartment. They reached out to mutual friends, trying to get messages through my suddenly impenetrable walls. And then Patricia Carter did something truly extraordinary. She showed up at my parents' apartment in Brooklyn. My mother called me from her kitchen, her voice a mixture of disbelief and barely contained rage. Julian, you're not going to believe who's standing on my doorstep right now. Who? Patricia Carter, looking like she stepped into the wrong neighborhood and is afraid of catching something. Don't let her in. Baby, I wasn't planning on letting her past the welcome mat. I could hear the conversation in the background, muffled but unmistakable. Patricia's voice, high and pleading. Mrs. Williams, please, I just want to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding between our families. Julian and Simone belong together. Surely you can see that. And my mother's voice, sharp as a blade. Mrs. Carter, you spent 6 years telling my son he wasn't good enough for your daughter. You made him feel small at every family dinner, every holiday, every single opportunity you got. You laughed at his dreams. You called him a failure behind his back and to his face. And now that he's proven himself, now that the whole world knows what I always knew, you want to pretend none of that happened. I was just looking out for my daughter's future. You were looking down on my son. You saw a black boy from Brooklyn, and you decided he wasn't worthy of your precious daughter, no matter what he accomplished. And now you're looking up at him, and you don't like the view. That's your problem, not ours. I heard the sound of a door closing firmly. When my mother called me back, she was breathing hard, her voice shaking with emotion. I've wanted to say that to that woman for 15 years, Julian. 15 years of biting my tongue while she treated you like garbage. I'm sorry. I know she's still technically your mother-in-law. Not for long, I said. And Mom, thank you for always believing in me when they didn't. Baby, believing in you was the easiest thing I ever did. The divorce proceedings moved forward over the next 3 months. Simone's attorney tried every legal maneuver possible to argue that the valuation date should be moved to after the IPO. They claimed ongoing marital partnership in the company's success. They argued that the timing was fundamentally unfair. They even suggested that I had somehow manipulated the IPO date to coincide with the divorce filing, which Reginald demolished with 3 months of documented preparation records. In the end, the law was clear. Simone received her equitable share of our marital assets, the house in Connecticut, worth $1.8 million, half of our joint savings, $340,000, and her portion of my pre-IPO Novatech stake, calculated at $57.5 million based on the 409A valuation from 6 months prior. $57 million was a fortune by any reasonable standard. It was more money than her father had earned in his entire career. It was enough to live comfortably for several lifetimes, to never worry about bills or expenses or financial security again. But it wasn't $476 million, which is what she would have received if she had waited 1 single day to file for divorce. The final divorce hearing was held on a rainy Thursday in March. I sat on one side of the courtroom with Reginald. Simone sat on the other with her attorney and her mother, who had insisted on attending for moral support. When the judge finalized the decree, I watched Simone's face. She didn't cry. She just looked empty, hollowed out by the weight of her own choices, by the realization that her impatience and her mother's advice had cost her more money than most people would see in 100 lifetimes. As we were leaving the courtroom, Patricia Carter blocked my path. The 61-year-old woman looked older than I remembered, the stress of the past few months having taken a visible toll. Her perfect facade was cracked, her designer confidence shaken. "I hope you're happy," she hissed, her voice low so only I could hear. "You've destroyed my daughter. You've humiliated our entire family." I looked at her with something approaching pity. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, I didn't destroy anyone. Simone made her choice. She chose to file for divorce because she believed I was worthless. She chose to listen to you when you told her she could do better. She chose to ignore everything I was building because she was so certain I would fail. The only thing I did was succeed. You could have told her about the IPO. You could have warned her about the timing." "Why?" I asked simply. "She didn't want to be married to me. She made that very clear when she handed me those papers. All I did was grant her wish." "This isn't over," Patricia warned. "My family has connections, lawyers, resources. We'll find a way to—" "To what?" I cut her off, my voice still calm, but now carrying an edge. "To appeal a legally sound ruling. To prove that your daughter's own filing date was somehow my fault. To argue that the law should be different for people who make bad decisions." I shook my head. "Mrs. Carter, You spent 15 years telling me I would never amount to anything. You looked at me and saw a scholarship kid who would never be good enough for your daughter. And you were so confident in that judgment that you never bothered to consider you might be wrong. This isn't about money or revenge or humiliation. This is simply what happens when the truth catches up with the lies we tell ourselves. She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. Do you know what the saddest part is, Mrs. Carter? I actually loved your daughter. I loved her so much that I endured years of your family's contempt, hoping she would eventually choose me over your approval. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to prove that I was worthy of her, worthy of being part of your family. And the whole time, you were poisoning her against me, whispering in her ear that she deserved better, convincing her that my dreams were delusions. You didn't just destroy my marriage, you destroyed your daughter's chance at being married to a man who would have given her everything. Patricia's face had gone pale. For the first time in 15 years, she seemed to have nothing to say. The money she lost by filing too early? That's not my revenge. That's the consequence of her own choices. Choices you encouraged. Choices you celebrated. You told her to leave me before I dragged her down. Well, she left, and now she has to live with the timing of that decision. Doctor. Vernon Carter appeared at his wife's side, his expression tight with controlled anger. Julian, I think you've said enough. I agree, sir. I've said enough. I've been saying enough for 15 years, and none of you ever listened. The difference now is that you have to. I straightened my tie, checked my watch, a $40,000 Patek Philippe that I had purchased the day after the IPO, and allowed myself a small smile. Have a good day, Dr. Carter, Mrs. Carter. I trust you can find your way out. I walked past them without another word. The days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, meetings, and the strange new reality of being a public figure. I was invited to speak at conferences. Business magazines requested profiles. Old acquaintances emerged from the woodwork, wanting to reconnect, or catch up, or, most commonly, pitch investment opportunities. Through it all, I kept working. Novatech was my legacy, and I refused to let the personal drama distract from the company's mission. We launched 3 new product features in the months after the IPO. We expanded into European markets. We hired 200 more employees, nearly doubling our team. Lisa watched me drive myself harder than ever and finally pulled me aside after a late-night strategy session. Julian, she said, her brown eyes full of concern. You know you're allowed to take a break, right? You're a billionaire now. You could buy an island and never work another day in your life. The work isn't about the money, I said. It never was. Then what is it about? I thought about it for a long moment. When I was 12 years old, my parents' car broke down. We couldn't afford to fix it, so my father walked his mail route for 3 months in a Brooklyn winter, while my mother took 2 buses to her home health aide jobs. They never complained. They just did what needed to be done. What does that have to do with Novatech? Everything. I turned to look at her. There are millions of small business owners out there just like my parents were. People working themselves to the bone. People who don't have fancy software or expensive consultants or any of the advantages that big companies take for granted. We're giving them tools to compete. We're leveling a playing field that's been tilted against them for generations. That's what this is about. That's why I can't stop working. Lisa was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but promise me you'll at least take a weekend off sometime. Go see your parents. Get some sleep. Remember what it feels like to be human. I promise, I said. And I meant it. I walked past her and didn't look back. If this story reminded you that you should never judge someone by appearances, and that timing really is everything, hit subscribe and leave a comment below. What would you have done in Julian's position? I read every comment. Now, let's see how this story ends. 8 months later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of my new penthouse in Tribeca, watching the sun set over the Manhattan skyline. The apartment had cost $32 million, a number that still made me shake my head in disbelief. But it was mine. Every square foot of it was bought and paid for with money I had earned, building something that mattered, something that helped thousands of small businesses thrive, something that created jobs and opportunities for people who reminded me of my younger self. Novatech's stock had continued its upward trajectory. My net worth now hovered around $1.4 billion, though I had diversified significantly on the advice of my financial team and donated substantial amounts to causes I believed in. I had established a $75 million scholarship fund for first-generation college students from underserved communities. I had invested in 23 startups founded by Black entrepreneurs who were building the next generation of innovation. I had bought my parents a beautiful brownstone in Harlem. My mother finally had her garden. My father finally had his workshop, though they still insisted I come over every Sunday for dinner, like I was still their little boy. I had started dating again, slowly and carefully. Her name was Camille Richardson, a 34-year-old black woman with deep brown skin and natural curls she wore proudly, a pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai, who worked 80-hour weeks saving children's lives. We had met at a charity gala 3 months ago. She had accidentally spilled wine on my sleeve, apologized profusely, and then spent the next hour asking me genuinely curious questions about enterprise software that had nothing to do with my net worth. "So your platform helps small businesses track inventory?" she had asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. Like, what does that actually mean in practice? I had spent 20 minutes explaining it to her, and she had listened, really listened, asking follow-up questions, challenging my assumptions, making me think about my own business in new ways. By the end of the conversation, I realized I hadn't enjoyed talking to someone this much in years. Camille didn't care about my money. She made her own money, lived her own life, had her own ambitions and achievements. She cared about who I was as a person, my values, my humor, my fears, my dreams. She had never once asked about my net worth or my stock price or my plans for acquisition. She just wanted to know if I preferred Ethiopian food or Thai, if I had ever been skydiving, if I believed in God. It was refreshing in a way I hadn't known I needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Camille. "Dinner tonight? I found a new Ethiopian place in Brooklyn that the residents have been raving about. Fair warning, I'm going to destroy some kitfo." I smiled, typing back, "Perfect. Pick you up at 7, and I accept your kitfo challenge." 3 dots appeared. She was typing. Then, "Just so you know, I told my mom about you and she Googled you, and now she's very excited. I apologize in advance if she asks about your business accomplishments. I told her I don't care about that stuff, but she doesn't believe me. I laughed out loud for the first time all day. Tell her I'm much more interesting to talk to about Ethiopian food and medical dramas." "That's what I said." She said, "That's nice, but is he going to take care of my daughter?" Moms are moms everywhere, apparently. I thought about that for a moment. Taking care of someone. What did that mean, really? Simone had wanted to be taken care of financially, wanted the status and security that came with a certain kind of lifestyle. Her mother had wanted the same thing for her. They had looked at me and seen a man who couldn't provide that, so they had dismissed me. But Camille didn't need me to provide for her. She made her own money, lived her own life, paid her own bills. When she talked about being taken care of, she meant something different. Emotional support, partnership, someone to come home to after a hard day of saving children's lives. She wanted a person, not a provider. The difference was everything. "Tell your mom I'm going to take care of her daughter by picking good restaurants and giving excellent hugs," I typed back. "The billions are just a bonus." She said, "I like him already. See you at 7, billionaire boy." I put down my phone and looked around my penthouse, at the art on the walls, the view of the city, the evidence of a life that had transformed beyond recognition in just a few years. All of this was mine, because I had refused to give up on myself when everyone else had. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from my mother. Sunday dinner this week. Your father is making his famous ribs and he'll be offended if you don't show up hungry. Also bring that nice girl you mentioned. We want to meet her. I smiled. Some things hadn't changed at all. I'll be there, I typed back. And I'll bring her. Fair warning. She's a surgeon, and she's smarter than all of us combined. My mother's response was immediate. Good. About time you found a woman who can keep up with you. As I waited for her response, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The kid from Bed-Stuy who took apart his first computer at age 8. The scholarship student who walked onto MIT's campus with everything to prove. The young husband who was told by his wife's family that he would never amount to anything. The entrepreneur who built a billion-dollar company while everyone around him waited for him to fail. I thought about Simone. Through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, I had heard that she had moved back in with her parents. The $57 million sat in investment accounts managed by her father's financial advisor, generating enough passive income for her to never work again. She had been introduced to several suitable men by her mother, doctors, lawyers, old money heirs, but nothing had stuck. Word was that she spent most of her time at the family home in Newton, unable to move forward, trapped by the weight of her own choices. I ran into her once, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I was leaving a restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place that requires reservations made weeks in advance, when I spotted her walking toward the entrance with an older man in an expensive suit. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. The man, oblivious, continued chatting about something while she stopped dead in her tracks. "Julian," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Simone." I kept my tone neutral, polite. "You look well." She didn't look well. She had lost weight, not in a healthy way, and there were dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite hide. But I wasn't going to say that. I wasn't going to say anything that could be interpreted as vindictiveness or cruelty. She glanced at her date, who had finally noticed she wasn't beside him anymore. I've been thinking about... "Simone, darling, everything all right?" The man walked back to her, placing a possessive hand on her lower back. He looked at me with the casual dismissal of someone who couldn't imagine I was worth noticing. "Everything's fine," Simone said quickly. "Julian, this is Bradford Worthington. Bradford, this is..." "Julian Williams," I said, extending my hand. "Novatech Solutions." I watched the recognition flash across Bradford's face, the sudden calculation, the reevaluation, the dawning awareness that he was standing in front of someone who could probably buy his family's estate and still have enough left over to never think about money again. The Julian Williams? Bradford's grip on my hand became firmer, more enthusiastic. "The tech fellow? Remarkable company you've built there. Simply remarkable. I was just telling my partners the other day that Novatech was..." "We were married," Simone interrupted, her voice flat. "Julian and I. We were married for 6 years." Bradford's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, surprise, calculation, and finally, a kind of pitying condescension that he probably thought was hidden, but was obvious to anyone paying attention. "Ah," he said. "I see. Well, these things happen, don't they? Water under the bridge and all that." "Indeed." I looked at Simone one last time. She looked small standing there, diminished somehow. Nothing like the confident woman who had handed me divorce papers in our kitchen. "Take care of yourself, Simone. I genuinely hope you find what you're looking for." I walked away before she could respond. That night, sitting alone in my penthouse with a glass of whiskey and the city lights glittering below, I thought about what taking care of yourself actually meant. For years, I had taken care of everyone else: Simone, her expectations, her family's expectations, my employees, my investors, my vision. I had poured everything I had into building something external while letting my internal life wither on the vine. It was time to change that. I started seeing a therapist, something that would have felt impossible just a few years ago, when every spare minute had to go toward the company. Dr. Michaela Robinson was a 60-year-old black woman with graying natural hair and the kind of direct gaze that made dishonesty feel impossible. She specialized in high-achieving professionals who had achieved everything except inner peace. "Tell me about your marriage," she said in our first session. "It ended badly." "That's not what I asked. Tell me about it." So I told her about Simone's beauty and how it had blinded me to everything else, about her family's disapproval and how I had internalized it, about the years of trying to prove myself worthy of love I should have received unconditionally, about the divorce and the timing and the money and the satisfaction I felt that I wasn't sure I was allowed to feel. Dr. Robinson listened without judgment. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said something that changed how I understood everything. "Julian, you spent your entire marriage trying to become worthy of someone who had already decided you weren't. That's not love. That's audition. You were auditioning for a role you had already been rejected for." "So what do I do now?" I asked. "Now?" She smiled. "Now you stop auditioning and start living." I didn't feel triumphant about her situation. I didn't feel vindicated by her struggles. I just felt free. Free from the constant need to prove myself to people who would never see my worth. Free from the exhausting work of loving someone who only loved what I could become, not who I was. Free to build a life on my own terms, with people who actually cared about me. The sun finished its descent behind the buildings of New Jersey, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Below me, the city hummed with its endless energy. 8 million stories unfolding simultaneously, 8 million people chasing their own dreams and fighting their own battles. My phone buzzed again. "Camille. 7 works. Also, I had a really hard day and could use a hug. Just warning you in advance." I typed back, "Hugs are my specialty. See you soon." I took one last look at the skyline, the buildings, the lights, the endless possibility of the city that had raised me. And I thought about who I was and who I had become. I was Julian Marcus Williams, founder, CEO, philanthropist, son of Theodore and Dorothy Williams, and someday, maybe, a husband again, to someone who would love me for exactly who I was. My wife filed for divorce the day before my startup went public. She thought she was escaping a sinking ship. Instead, she stepped off a rocket one day before it reached the stars. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to shine, waiting for their parents to approve, their partners to believe, their critics to admit they were wrong. I spent 6 years being told I would never succeed, by my wife, by her family, by everyone who looked at me and saw only where I came from instead of where I was going. But here's the truth I learned, the truth I want everyone watching this to understand. You don't need anyone's permission to build something incredible. You don't need their approval, their belief, or their support. You just need your own vision, your own work ethic, and the patience to outlast the people who doubt you. The people who underestimate you are just giving you space to surprise them. The people who dismiss your dreams are just making room for you to prove them wrong. And the people who walk away before your success, they were never meant to share in it anyway. My name is Julian Williams. I am a black man from Brooklyn who built a billion-dollar company, while his wife and her family watched and waited for him to fail. I am proof that your circumstances don't determine your destiny, that your critics don't define your potential, and that the best revenge is simply living the life you always knew you deserved. And I am just getting started. The road ahead is long and full of possibilities I can barely imagine. Novatech will continue to grow, to evolve, to serve the small business owners who are the backbone of every economy. I will continue to invest in entrepreneurs who remind me of myself, hungry, overlooked, determined to prove that where you start doesn't have to determine where you finish. Maybe someday I'll marry again. Maybe Camille and I will build something lasting, something real, something based on mutual respect and genuine love rather than auditioning for approval that was never going to come. Maybe we'll have children who will never have to wonder if they're good enough, because we'll tell them every single day that they are. Or maybe none of that will happen. Maybe the future holds challenges and setbacks I can't predict. That's okay. I've been underestimated before. I've been dismissed before. I've been told I would fail by people who didn't know the first thing about what I was capable of. And I'm still standing. The sun has set completely now, and the city below is a constellation of lights. Millions of people living their lives, chasing their dreams, fighting their battles. Somewhere in that city, Simone Carter Williams is probably looking at her bank statements and wondering what might have been. Somewhere in Newton, Massachusetts, Patricia Carter is probably telling herself that I was lucky, that success like mine is a fluke, that someday the whole house of cards will come tumbling down. Let them think that. Let them believe whatever makes them feel better about the choices they made. Their opinions stopped mattering to me the day I rang that bell. My phone buzzes one more time. This time, it's a notification from the Novatech Investor Relations portal. Tomorrow's earnings call is scheduled, and analysts are predicting another strong quarter. I pocket the phone and take a deep breath of New York City air, car exhaust and ambition, and the promise of things yet to come. My wife filed for divorce the day before my startup went public. She thought she was leaving a failure. Instead, she let go of a future she couldn't even imagine. And now that future belongs to me. Just me. Exactly as it should be.